Hey, everybody. We're here again with Sandy and Josh Greenberg to talk about the current state of the investigation into their daughter's death 12 years ago. Now, a quick review. For 12 years, it's been bottled up by the authorities in Philadelphia, first by the district attorney's office, then the attorney general's office, headed by Josh Shapiro, who's now the governor of Pennsylvania. For 12 years, they got nowhere, despite repeated appeals to really look into the case. Their daughter Ellen stabbed 20 times, 10 in the front, one right through the heart, 10 in the back of the neck and head, 10 times. Almost physically impossible for her to have done that to herself. Yet the authorities say nothing to see here, clear-cut suicide. Anyway, after allegedly conflicts of interest with Josh Shapiro's office, it was kicked over eventually to Deb Ryan, the DA in Chester County, who recently, her staff interviewed the Greenbergs to supposedly look into whether this case should be reopened. Now, Sandy and Josh, generally, what was your reception? What was their demeanor when you were ushered into the office and they began questioning you?
Well, the funniest part of the whole thing is we're seated in a boardroom with our attorney, Joe Pedroza, Josh and myself on one side, and then Deb Ryan, Detective Stasa, who was the chief detective, another gentleman, and then Andrea Cameron. And they were professing their
sincerity and honesty,
that they're full of integrity and they want to do an honest investigation. And then as the conversation moves along, I'm asking them questions about things that are missing in the investigation, and they're clueless.
Also,
they're all sitting there. Now, everybody uses a computer. No, they're in pen and paper, like when I was in college, taking notes like a dictation, writing furiously, like they've never heard the information before, which really disappointed me terribly.
All I could think of, because they were saying how honest they were going to be, is Shakespeare. Thou dost protest too much, my dear.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, if they would have said we're going to be honest and just left it at that, but they pounded on it. And then Sandy and I were separated. We each went into a room with a detective. I went in first with the detective and our attorney. And basically, I was questioned about Ellen's state of mind and her personality at the time of her death.
Yeah, actually, what's really important here is not just the questions that were asked, but perhaps more importantly, the questions that were not asked.
Not asked.
Yeah.
Well,
precisely.
Okay, I have a little problem with going over questions that weren't asked, so I'll stick to questions that were. And that was basically her demeanor, her personality, her temperament, and all the things we did to try and help her. And they really didn't have much information. And it was the first time that anybody really said, "What do you think happened?" And I told them. First, I looked at Pedroza, because we've been instructed to be careful about saying things like that. And he said, "Go ahead." So I told him that I thought the abuse Ellen had suffered was trying to be covered up by her death. And that's what I believe. That was the cause. Go ahead.
What kind of abuse?
Domestic violence.
Physical abuse. She had injuries on her, bruising. There were different states of healing. And this was all in the autopsy.
She had a thumbprint.
Well, that's not abuse. That's part of the attack.
Okay.
She had bruises from abuse.
The autopsy said it all.
He mentioned the abuse. And one thing I always come back to is how come, okay, let's say they've ruled it a suicide, great. But if she was being abused, doesn't that mean there was somebody out there that still may abuse other women? And why isn't the Philadelphia Department of Police looking for that to protect their citizens?
Yeah. Well, you know, did they ask if Ellen ever tried to hurt herself before?
They might have. I have a story where she wanted to get a second ear piercing, and I made it sound painful, and she really backed off quickly.
She chickened out.
Yeah.
Josh took her to the place to have the second hole put in and she chickened out.
She didn't like the idea of herself being hurt.
Right. Did they ask about the conversation, Sandy, that you had with Ellen that very morning? Or did they ask about the content?
I can't, I think it came up, but I can't say for sure. I know I've been interviewed so many times that I can't specifically remember what questions they had for me, but
What struck us,
I remember the conversation that I had with her vividly that morning.
And what was the conversation? What was the tone and tenor of it?
She was in her car driving and I was in my bathroom putting makeup on and getting ready to go to work. And I was saying, you know, please check your mail and make sure that if you get anything for tax purposes, set it aside, because we send, you know, all our things to our accountant who is out of town. And fast forward on that for one moment. In April, when our accountant went to file her taxes and ours, Ellen's check was cashed.
her check,
And her identity was stolen.
her tax return was filed. Her refund was sent, not to her, to somebody else. And we never, that's as far as it ever got.
You know who it was sent to?
Vaguely, but it was never pursued.
Anybody she knew?
No.
No. It's there's so much shade involved here.
I don't really know if that's relevant, a part
That's
of the
my
case.
opinion.
Yeah.
So Sandy, though, during that conversation, you didn't sense any kind of anxiety on her part to the extent that she was so emotionally upset that she would have no indication of that at all.
No, it was a very normal day. I went to work for a half a day and then my boss closed the office because of the impending nor'easter. And I was later to find out that Ellen had called all the parents of her students and school was closed early. And she was calling to let them know that, you know, they needed to pick up their children and she wanted to always make sure that they got home safely. Then I know because of a receipt found in her handbag that was later returned to me from the fiance's uncle, who was holding on to it for safekeeping, was a receipt for gas where she filled up her entire tank of gas. And it was on January 26th at 1:26.
Ellen we don't understand.
So we know that timeline. And she got home maybe like within 5 minutes after that and went up to the apartment. And the fiance was not working at the time in January. That's like a dead zone. They don't do a lot of work. So he was off. He was off and
he worked for the NBC Golf. There was no golf in the winter. So he really didn't have a job then. Ellen also had been asking us, she wanted to come home, leave Philadelphia. And we didn't know why. We made a deal that if we got a psychiatrist to work with her, because I had two goals. A, my daughter's behavior had changed somewhat drastically, in my opinion, but I didn't know why and what. And B, we wanted to preserve her job. That's all we wanted. And the psychiatrist saw her for roughly three visits, gave her some medication, which was never abused. And the amount of medication from the drug test was well within normal limits. And the lady, the psychiatrist, also in her notes said Ellen was not suicidal. Ellen was not depressed. The diagnosis was anxiety. Like you're driving on the turnpike, a truck pulls up next to you and is hovering over your car, and you're anxious.
Well, considering what you just said, one would think the question would be asked about her relationship with her fiance who found the body. Was anything asked about that, the relationship?
Yes, she said he was her rock.
But how much did the questioners pursue questions about the relationship? To me, that was...
I can't answer it that way. I will answer by a little story. Two detectives were interviewed by Stephanie Farr, who wrote the original article in the newspaper, the Philadelphia Inquirer. that really set everything off.
Mhm.
And they said, wasn't she a Pilates or yoga instructor? That's what the abusers, the detectives thought the saying of the abuse was from. No, she wasn't. And then they called back and they said, we were interviewed by the attorney general, and he said, we can't talk to you. And she said, well, it's too late. You did. So they said, what newspaper you work for? They said, she said she works for the Philadelphia Inquirer. And they said their circulation is not as great. To which they responded,
To which
she
Stephanie
responded, oh, I guess you have nothing to worry about.
Hmm.
Which is comical. And these are detectives who said they had 20 years experience. And I still, to this day, don't understand why there was no investigation into the abuse, because I fear for somebody else being abused and murdered, because there's a murderer out there and somebody who abuses women out there.
Or murderers.
Whatever.
Yeah,
But that's what I believe, and that's what we believe, because our daughter did not commit suicide. She was a victim of a brutal homicide.
Now, did they ask about what was taken from the apartment that belonged to both the fiance? We might as well say his name, Sam Goldberg. Both items belonging to the fiance and to Ellen. There were items taken by James Schwartzman, the lawyer uncle, who came to the apartment before the police.
He had no permission to touch or take any of Ellen's property.
Essentially, we would think that would be him taking something from an investigatory site. Because it was a suicide, there was no police lines to mark off an area of investigation. Turned them 3-4 days later to the police. But essentially, he took things that did not belong to him, that he didn't have permission to do, that there's no excuse except he's going to say to a judge, I did it to protect, so things will get stolen.
He's a judge who knows the law, who did not have her parents' permission.
Or
He's
hers.
never made eye contact with me. He removed the electronics out of the chain of custody.
He took her computer, her work computer.
He did not return any of this to us when he attended her funeral in Harrisburg, which right there, okay, so he didn't return it. Oops, maybe he has a whatever. Okay. A lawyer in Philadelphia with all of his connections doesn't know how to use snail mail, UPS, DHL, UPS. I really would love to know.
He didn't return it to us. He returned it to the police.
He didn't return her pocketbook, her credit cards, her car keys. I had to wait weeks and weeks and weeks to first pursue all of those things while her identity was stolen.
Yeah, tell us about that. That was when Schwartzman and who was it? His son or his
Camion Schwartzman.
And who was that related to Schwartzman?
That's James Schwartzman's son and Sam's best friend and first cousin.
Okay, and they came to the apartment, and it involved Ellen's cell phone, computer, other items.
Computers, cell phone.
Work and personal computers.
Yeah.
Her handbag with all the contents of credit cards, keys, access to vital information that we were not able to obtain.
He also
we came to Philadelphia to fill out the stuff at City Hall when he had, I'd say, I don't know how many weeks were in between. He didn't bring it to us at the funeral. He never chose to use UPS, snail mail, DHL, or what is it, UPS. And so he held on to her property, which he had no authority to do. I don't care if he's a judge. I don't care how trustworthy he thinks he is. He had no right or no permission from me, her mother.
Just to be complete, though, he did take Sam's computer also. I just want to be complete.
And somehow, what I don't understand, Larry, is cell phones have tracking. And I don't care how many new cell phones the fiance and the Schwartzmans replaced between the time of Ellen's death and now, but there's a record and it can be looked back, whether they're erased, they're deleted, they're this, they're that. It all can be tracked. So who the fiance called before Ellen's passing and who he called after, and in what order and where their pings were from is all out there.
We have
Just
that.
nobody's, no, we don't have it.
Yes, we
Well,
do.
We have some of it.
Right.
We have a very limited scope, but it's not enough for me. I'm not satisfied.
We
with-
have his call to 911. We know that he spoke to his uncle and other his father and
I
mother.
know, but no
That's
one's
it, Sandy.
investigating
That's
it.
it. Why should they
In
investigate?
addition to which,
Sandy, the case is closed. They're not going to investigate anything.
well, in addition to which, we've gone to the FBI on three different occasions, trying to,
Saying that there was a conspiracy here, and this case should be looked at as a conspiracy, and they also should look at her civil rights were impaired by her murder.
And what came of that?
Nothing yet.
How recently did you go to the FBI?
I'm sorry, say again?
How recently did you go to the
A couple of
FBI?
weeks ago,
maybe
again.
3 weeks ago on a Monday.
Yeah.
And that was the third time.
The real bugaboo here, or something that's really upsetting here, even though the chain of custody was lost on her personal computers, they are still saying that she did things with that. In other words, they're saying she looked up suicide or
When
something.
Josh says they, we're talking about the politicians.
We're talking about the Attorney General's office and
Who's a
the,
politician?
great, Attorney General's office and people in the, basically the Attorney General's office. The FBI looked at the computers and said there was nothing. We also had somebody look at the computers after, and they said there was nothing. The most interesting examination of the computers was performed allegedly by Josh Shapiro's Attorney General's office. And there was a meeting between our investigator, Tom Brennan, and our lawyer at the time, Cohen, who was a former Attorney General. And they mentioned that they had just cloned the hard drive of Ellen's computer. And that was in 2018, 2019, something like that. And Brennan simply, very calmly and very professionally said, how did you do that if the computer has been locked up since 2015?
Radio silence.
They didn't say anything. He then asked for a copy of the report. Nothing. Brennan also feels their quotation about Ellen's alleged search regarding suicide was very much like a search that one of Larry Krasner's men found. So we really, and it came down when it was looked at very carefully, it was what they call a ghost,
Search.
no, a ghost, I don't know what. It's when you look at Larry Sparano, and you found out Larry Sparano was a belly dancer in the circus when he was 12 years old.
How did you find that out?
Well, you know, I'm very thorough, but it's nonsense stuff. Ellen was looking up whether or not the medications would make her gain weight.
Yeah.
And you know, these medications, there is not a medication that I know of. You could even drink water to kill yourself. It's happened.
Yeah. So
Seriously, I'm not making this up.
so-called suicide searches are really, I guess, what they call ghost indications. Where
Yes.
certain
What
medications.
those are called, no, when they come up with, when you look up my name and you get those other things, they're called ghost searches. You're correct.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, it wasn't.
There's also one more thing I'd like to bring out. It has come to my attention in the last number of months. Ellen also approached a friend of ours about leaving the apartment and moving with a friend of ours, an adult. And when they asked about, is the fiance going to come? Ellen did not answer that question, just simply walked away. I never heard about this until a couple of months ago, after 11 years. Now, I don't know if it would have changed anything, but I know it's out there.
But again, it strikes me that Deb Ryan's crew of investigators should have been asking you extensively about the relationship between Ellen and Sam Goldberg, because
No, they were really not working for us. They were,
We
I
don't,
feel they were working against us.
well, I don't know about that, but that's what our experiences with the authorities. But our joint feeling is they didn't have anything. Either the Attorney General didn't turn it over, or he never did anything. And I think it's a case of both. He didn't have anything, but he made sure he didn't have anything to turn over.
did they ask about the nature of your contacts and conversations with Sam Goldberg, the fiance, following Ellen's death?
I
Yes.
believe so, but I really had none, so that I'll leave to Sandy.
What happened is after Ellen passed, he made his periodic phone calls, and we made nice back and forth, back and forth. And at the time, I did not know what I know now, but I fully stick by everything I said. I said, and you know, Sam, we know Ellen did not commit suicide. And there was like a dead silence. And that went on until I received an email from him announcing his
Okay.
that he found someone else and that he was going to move on with his life, because he thought that Ellen would want that for him. And I didn't answer back. And I don't know much more. I've not heard much from them. And they don't seem to, whenever any reporter speaks to us, they reach out to the fiance and his family and his cousins and uncles, and none of them respond.
There are two main things here. Number one, Ellen was not a suicide victim. She was a homicide victim. Number two, the authorities are afraid that if we can win and the medical examiner's conclusions can be challenged, they're going to have lawsuits. That's all this is all about.
But so my question
Well,
is,
I think there is
why-
also, one second, Sandy. I think there's also some possible pressure from outside sources. I can't, that's just a feeling I have. But the two
When-
things I said already are the two main things that
my
they're,
question is why? I'm asking the question, why, when I have to get accredited and I have to perform my profession and take continuing ed and do all of that and live up to everything, what makes a medical examiner or a police officer or a lawyer or a political official not have to live by those same standards? It's called standard of care in the medical.
they don't have to.
They should be held accountable for their decisions and what they do. They don't deserve a pass any better than I do.
The way the law looks at the medical examiner's conclusion, it's his opinion.
Yeah.
It's an opinion. It's not a fact. So that's why he cannot be challenged. Am I
Yep.
right, Larry?
But he had two opinions. One was it was a homicide first. Then at the insistence of the police, he changed it to suicide.
Because they said
He
certain,
couldn't change it to undetermined. He had to change it to suicide.
because the
I
police,
think that's shady.
the issue here is not that. The issue is here, and Larry will say this, I know, when can the police tell the medical examiner what to decide? They can't.
Never. But they did in this case.
And that's what happened.
You
The
know,
medical,
go ahead.
no, I have nothing.
All right, with Sam
I
Goldberg,
never have nothing, but go ahead.
getting back to the fiance.
Oh,
After you told him point blank that it wasn't a suicide, did he ever express any curiosity or any doubt that it wasn't a suicide? Any curiosity that maybe it should be investigated?
Not that I recall.
not that we're aware of.
Not that I recall.
Not that we're aware
He
of.
was very comfortable knowing or thinking that
If
it was labeled a suicide, even though I was contradicting it.
it was, well, I just read something interesting. I don't know who wrote this, but we saw something. If you want to protect yourself from
In the Penn Live
a
article.
murder investigation, get it to look like a suicide.
Yeah.
Because that shuts down any further investigation. Right.
Right.
But so now the whole situation is out there for the public to see. We have the politicians who are, I mean, they're so quiet, they're not responding at all. And I don't know, like, why aren't they They should be humiliated.
Well, something that I'd like to get out there, as long as Larry's got us here. Number one, there's probably going to be an article in a national magazine, one of the biggies. Number two, we're negotiating and working with 2 different production companies to make a series of a docuseries. So this is far from over. This is not a dead crime.
Right.
We're keeping it alive, and we intend to do that. And anybody that wants to talk to us in this fashion, like we are with Larry, I hope you don't mind me saying these things, Larry.
Fine.
Give us a call. We'll be happy to accommodate you and give you the facts.
The more curiosity, the more publicity, the better, because this case
Well,
are on the vine.
it's also like brainstorming. You get a crowd together, a number of people together to review an issue, and you get different ideas.
How should folks get in touch with you?
Go to
Reach out to Justice for Ellen and leave a comment in the, however you reach, I don't
it's in
understand
Facebook. She's talking about Facebook.
And they will get us the,
Or call Pedroza, a lawyer in Philadelphia.
right.
That's attorney.
Or how about reaching out to you, Larry?
Yeah.
Me too. I have my own podcast, On Target with Larry Sparano. I'm on YouTube and other platforms.
And
yeah,
we are truly thankful for the media.
And you.
What we don't have in finances to do this against the infinite wealth that we're up against, the media has taken that place.
and you've been spending your own money big time to pursue this.
Yes.
story.
Well, it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
I once had a patient who had a son who died or something. I don't know the exact case. And because she had such limited funds, her attorney said, just settle.
Yeah. A lot of people do that.
And she told me she regretted it.
Yeah.
And also, I'm not patting myself on the head or whatever, but it's come to my attention. This fight we're doing will change a lot of things for a lot of people, a lot of situations. If we should be able to get to the situation where we can try and let's say review a medical examiner's conclusion.
So in summary, we are fighting for justice for Ellen Ray Greenberg, but we are also fighting for all the families who have victims of violent crimes, and that the easy way out was to label it a suicide when it was clearly not, and let them have a voice.
And you've been keeping up this fight for the past 12 years. It must be tearing you apart inside every day. So the pursuit is not pleasant for you, but it's deeply important for justice, not just for Ellen, but for all of us who could be the victims of the same type of
Right.
Well,
Like I always say, Ellen could be your daughter,
Right.
your sister, your mother, your
anybody,
aunt.
any female.
We were not raising her to be a victim of a violent crime. We were raising her to be the best version of her personal self so she could achieve and stand on her own 2 feet and contribute to society. And sadly, at 27, she's extinguished.
well, folks, again, our heart goes out to you. I know anybody listening to this would feel the same way. So we will continue these interviews, and I hope the publicity continues to increase so more and more people learn about how there was a miscarriage of justice in this case.
So Larry, anyone that's new to your podcast, if they would like to follow our case, they could learn more on Justice for Ellen on Facebook. I think we have a Twitter account and possibly an Instagram account. It's out of my realm, but there are ways to follow Justice for Ellen Ray Greenberg.
And right now, we are very busy with this, more so than we have been. Like I said, we're now negotiating with 2 production crews to get something on a network or
A
a
docuseries.
docuseries. And we also have somebody that's going to be, we were told that's going to be writing an article for a national magazine. So right now, don't tell me this is all over. It's not.
We'll talk again. Thanks very
Yeah.
much, folks. And
Thank you,
Thank you.
Larry. Thank you.